Some presidents never have to face the kind of tragedy that in an instant touches an entire country. President Bush, just 2 years in, has more experience with catastrophe than anyone should have to deal with. There was September 11th, of course, and now this. Different tragedies, to be sure, different magnitudes, but both tests. We go back to the White House now, and our senior White House correspondent, John King. John, good evening.
Good evening to you, Aaron. The president took some calls of condolences today. The leaders of Spain, Pakistan, and India calling here to the White House. That last conversation with Prime Minister Vajpayee of India, perhaps the most poignant. The two leaders reminiscing about mission specialist Kalpana Chawla, born in India, a U.S. citizen, among the astronauts killed in the disaster yesterday. Mr. Bush will meet here in the morning with Sean O'Keefe, the NASA administrator. White House officials saying the president wants to get a face-to-face update on the early stages of the investigation. He also told Administrator O'Keefe today to go up to Congress as well, where key lawmakers already want to ask questions about the status of the investigation. That meeting will come as the administration's budget is released. Prior to this disaster, a great deal of focus on the record deficits that will be in that budget. Now, of course, there will be a look at the NASA budget as well. We can show you some figures, I believe. The budget in the new fiscal year coming up, the proposal is for about $15.5 billion. You can see it's a relatively modest increase over the past 2 years, essentially just keeping pace with inflation. White House officials saying in that $15.47 billion will be some new money to extend the life of the aging shuttle fleet. That will become one of the controversies in the debate ahead. You can go back to past congressional testimony, reports from federal agencies, a great deal of questions in recent years as to whether the tight budgets were forcing NASA to skimp on safety. No one saying there is any connection at all to the tight budgets and what happened yesterday, but of course that will be a focus as well in the days and weeks ahead. White House officials say no decision as to whether to ask for even more emergency money to try to replace the shuttle that was destroyed. They say they want to wait and hear the final results of the investigation first. And of course, after his day here at the White House tomorrow, Mr. Bush and the First Lady will go to Houston on Tuesday, an early afternoon memorial service there. The president again will speak to the nation as he tries to lead the morning. Aaron?
John, has the president, in your time with him, expressed particular interest in the space program?
We have not heard him talk publicly much about it. In fact, there was a great deal of questioning, some skepticism, if you will, when he chose Sean O'Keefe to head NASA because he came out of the Office of Management and Budget. A great many people thought perhaps the Bush White House was going to tighten even further on NASA's budget, if you will, and try to skimp even more money out of it. But White House officials say that has not been the case, and if you ask around the folks at NASA, and I'm sure you're encountering many of them there in Houston, they say actually they've been pleasantly surprised by Sean O'Keefe, and they have found him to be someone who quickly studied up on the job and has been quite an able administrator, obviously like the president, a man in the spotlight right now.
And at least in the short term, and in the short term I think I actually mean a couple of days, this has taken the focus off Iraq, off the Powell session at the UN midweek. What has the mood in the White House been the last 24 hours, 36 hours?
Taken the focus off for us, but here at the White House they say the president is determined to move forward. He is rescheduling a meeting on Tuesday with the King of Bahrain. Bahrain does not get much attention when we focus on the Arab nations and their potential role in a conflict with Iraq, but Bahrain is critical. It is the home base of U.S. naval forces in the Persian Gulf area. That meeting will be postponed, but Secretary Powell's presentation will go on. White House officials say the president is determined, even as he is struck and mourning himself because of this disaster, determined to go forward. One interesting anecdote, when the president was calling the family members yesterday, he was calling them as they were down in Houston. They had been waiting for the landing that never happened, of course. The president turned. Aides say he was shielding his own tears from members of his staff in the Oval Office during those phone calls. One very close friend of this president I spoke to earlier today said it is a very lonely job.
John, thank you. Senior White House correspondent John King tonight. Someone once said of this city, Houston is 6 suburbs in search of a center. But there is a center, an emotional one, and a deep source of pride and affection. And that center is the space program. People have been coming by the Johnson Space Center all day to pay their respects, to leave notes, to leave flowers, to leave tears, and to make it clear that the astronauts will not be forgotten. Of course, we all lost something yesterday. We lost 7 heroes. But Houston, the people of Space City, lost 7 neighbors.
All day long they came. They came with flowers. Parents came with the very young who could not really understand. Indeed, you began to see the difference between knowing with your head and believing with your heart.
Just couldn't believe it. It's unfathomable. You know, I remember where I was when it happened a few years back, and here I am today.
What would have been a routine Sunday bicycling ride for NASA's bicycling club was something quite different today.
We're having a really difficult time accepting the fact that this took place, and on the ride yesterday, the phones were ringing off the hook, even on the back of the cyclists. We could hear phones everywhere. People were being informed, and we had a memorial after the ride.
At Grace Community Church, the memorials had a special poignancy. Two of the shuttle's crew members, the commander, Rick Husband, and the payload commander, Mike Anderson, were both members. And church members say they didn't just show up on Sunday. They played a regular and important role in the life of their church.
Yes, Rick was very active in the church. He was. He sang a lot of solos.
A tremendous family man. Such a wonderful example of a great father and husband.
Members of Congress were at the service as well, promising the familiar. Space exploration, despite its risks and despite today's sorrow, will go on.
The reason I was here today is to reaffirm the love that this nation has for a very exciting space program, and likewise to be very direct by saying that the space program will not end, and that this is no time to look for accusations as much as it is to look for facts.
In the remote ranch country of East Texas, today was a day for connections as well. More than 1,000 pieces of the shuttle's wreckage fell here, including these 20 or so segments, pieces of pipe, insulation, even a big segment of the tiles on the ranch of Lindy Hinson.
I went down, fed my heifers, and maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes later, I was down there, and this piece I was showing you, it hit the barn down there.
It's in town. It's just about on every place around here. Through this area, right here where Mr. Henson is, was a pretty good debris field. The, you know, maybe some of the larger stuff fell, and there's lots of the tiles that have come loose.
Even in winter, the landscape here is beautiful. And Lindy Hinson knows that from now on, his ranch will have a small but special place in the history of manned space travel and the risk it entails.
My boy came home yesterday. Them other boys didn't.
After the liftoff of Columbia, one Israeli diplomat said it was moving to see the white smoke from the rockets set against the blue sky, to see his nation's colors as one of their own made it into space for the first time. Today, the nation of Israel is covered in blue and white. Again, flags lowered to half-staff, mourning the loss of astronaut Ilan Ramon, and the loss of a mission that brought his people, ever so briefly, miles above the turmoil they live in and live with here on Earth. Here's CNN's Gerald Kessel.
When Air Force Colonel Ilan Ramon headed for Columbia's blastoff, he was a rare symbol of hope and pride for Israelis, battered and buffeted by more than 2 years of deadly conflict. Now, in the tails of smoke over Texas, those hopes have vanished.
We had a little bit of a moment of pride, a moment of light, and it seems to be taken away from us.
Remnants of a dream, this banner headline. Weeping for Ilan, the message here, as students, from the very youngest, talked about the tragedy, seeking, like all Israelis, to come to grips with the pain that has replaced the innocent hope.
Because he was a representative of the country in this issue, it was more hurting than anyone that was killed in a car bomb or something like that.
From space, Ilan Ramon spoke of the vulnerability of the planet, of the smallness of his own country, feelings resonating all the more with his fellow Israelis now.
We thought that this hope will bring us a little bit smile to the face, because this period is very difficult for us in Israel. we hope that this project will continue with other Israeli astronauts.
Ariel Sharon sent condolences to the people of the United States. The Prime Minister called Ramon a bold pilot who did not, he said, deserve to be taken from us, along with our hopes and dreams. But with U.S. Ambassador Dan Kurtz at his side, Sharon insisted the tragedy should not mean the end of the brave endeavor.
Their deaths are not in vain. Man's journey into space will continue. Cooperation between the United States and Israel in this field will continue. The day will come when we will launch more Israeli astronauts into space.